never imagined my own son would look me in the eyes one evening in Atlanta and tell me I didn't belong in the house I built with my bare hands. It wasn't the shouting that stayed with me. It was the quiet afterward, the kind that makes you realize something sacred has already cracked. I'll tell you what happened next, and maybe, as you listen, you'll remember a moment that once changed you too. By the time a man reaches his 60s, he thinks he's seen every kind of disrespect the world can throw at him. Turns out, the worst kind doesn't come from strangers. It comes from across your own dinner table. That Sunday evening in Atlanta, the grill was still smoking in the backyard when I set the last plate down. Derek sat at the head of the folding table like it was his house, not mine. His wife, Tasha, scrolled on her phone with one hand and poked at the salad with the other. My grandkids chased each other near the fence, arguing about who got the bigger piece of corn. I'd just pulled my chair in when Derek reached over and snatched my car keys from beside my plate. The metal jingled in his fist. I stared at his hand first, then his face. "What are you doing, son?" He didn't look at me like a son looks at a father. He looked at me like a supervisor catching an employee with something he wasn't supposed to have. "It's time you stopped driving, Dad," he said. His voice was too loud for the little yard. "You almost clipped that mailbox last week. You're done making the decisions around here." The word "done" hit harder than the rest. The kids went quiet. Even the neighbor's dog stopped barking for a second. Tasha didn't say a thing. She just pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on her plate as if the lettuce had suddenly become very interesting. I could feel the old training in me, the years in the army, the years working security at the airport. Count to 3. Breathe. Don't react to the first hit. So I didn't lunge for the keys, didn't slam my hand down, didn't remind him it was my name on the mortgage, my credit that bought the car, my back that had carried this family long before he knew how to spell responsibility. Instead, I pushed my chair back. "We can talk about this inside later," I said. He shook his head, smirking. "No, we're talking now. You don't get to keep pretending nothing's wrong." That part stung more than the rest, because it wrapped itself in a hint of truth. I had been pretending some things were fine. The unanswered questions, the way he'd started handling the mail before I saw it, the "don't worry about it, Dad, I've got it," said just a little too often. My father used to say, "When someone shows you their respect, believe it the first time." I'd forgotten that lately. Tasha finally glanced up. "Derek, the kids," she murmured. "Can we just eat?" He didn't take his eyes off me. "They need to see how things are now," he answered. I looked at my grandkids, 8 and 10, forks hovering over their plates, eyes big, trying to read the room like little adults. I couldn't stand that. So I did the only thing that felt like mine to do. I stood. My knees complained the way 63-year-old knees do, but I held myself straight. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly. "I'm going to sit this one out." No one stopped me. The air inside the house felt cooler, quieter. I walked through the sliding door and down the short hallway, past the family pictures I'd hung over the years. Derek's high school graduation. His mother in that blue dress she loved. The 3 of us at Stone Mountain. Him sitting on my shoulders, yelling that he could see all the way to heaven. I didn't recognize the man on the patio who had just snatched my keys. In the kitchen, the sink was piled with tongs and greasy pans. I turned the faucet on, let the water run just to have some sound other than my own heartbeat. What bothered me most wasn't the keys. Keys can be taken, copies can be made. It was the way he said, "You're done," like there'd been a private meeting somewhere, some silent vote I hadn't been invited to, and the verdict had already come down. I leaned on the counter and tried to slow my thoughts. Derek had moved his family into my house 2 years earlier, when he'd been laid off from his sales job. At the time, it felt right. His wife was pregnant with their second child. Rent in Atlanta wasn't getting any cheaper. "Stay here until you get back on your feet," I'd told him. "This is your home too." I meant it when I said it. I meant it the first 6 months when he handed me crumpled bills for the light bill. I meant it the day I gave up my den so the kids could have a playroom. Somewhere between then and now, the meaning had shifted for him. The muffled sound of Derek's voice floated in from the yard, sharp edges in every sentence. I could no longer make out every word, just the tone. Explanations, justifications, things a man says to make himself feel right when he knows he's wrong. I turned the faucet off. The house felt different than it had that morning. Same walls, same furniture, but something had shifted. It was like finding a crack in the foundation, too small to see from the street, big enough to let in every kind of trouble if you ignored it. One of the kids burst through the sliding door and ran to the bathroom without looking at me. A minute later, he hurried back outside. The door shut. The yard swallowed him whole. I walked down the hall to my bedroom. The door stuck a little, the way it always did when the humidity rose. I'd been meaning to sand that edge, but life has a way of filling your list with bigger problems. Inside, the room was simple. Bed, dresser, old chair by the window. The smell of my wife's perfume still clung to the closet, even though she'd been gone 8 years. I sat on the edge of the bed and laced my fingers together. There are moments in a man's life when he can feel the line being crossed in real time, not in hindsight, not looking back. Right there, second by second, like watching someone drag their foot over a boundary you once thought everyone understood. Derek grabbing those keys was that line for me. He had raised his voice to me before, rolled his eyes, talked over me when we disagreed about job choices, money choices, parenting choices. I'd let most of it slide, told myself this is how grown sons push back. Told myself he's stressed. Told myself you're old school, Marcus. Maybe you're being too hard. You can explain away a lot when you don't want to face what's really changing. I pulled my wallet out, checked for the spare key I'd tucked there months ago after the first time he borrowed my car without asking. The metal pressed into my palm, small and solid. At least that hadn't been taken from me yet. Voices rose again outside. A short burst of laughter from someone, then silence. Part of me wanted to march back out, demand respect, lay the law down like fathers in those old movies. But this wasn't a movie, and Derek wasn't a kid anymore. He was a grown man with his own pride, inflated and fragile at the same time. More than that, I knew something he seemed to have forgotten. Once words are thrown in anger, they don't ever fully disappear. They lodge in the walls, in the furniture, in the hearts of 8 and 10-year-olds, trying to understand who they are in relation to the adults around them. So I stayed seated. I thought about my own father, a mechanic who never let anyone make him feel small in his own home. He used to tell me, "Son, you teach people how to treat you. If you don't like the lesson, change the class." Back then, I'd nodded just to make him happy. Tonight, his words felt like they'd finally grown teeth. If Derek could rip those keys away in front of his children, in my yard, with my grill still smoking behind him, then this wasn't a one-time slip. It was the latest chapter in a story I hadn't wanted to read. I pulled off my watch, set it on the nightstand. The second hand ticked on, steady, not caring about pride or hurt feelings. Somewhere between those ticks, I realized my silence at that table hadn't been kindness. It hadn't been patience. It had been me stepping back so far that there was no chair left for me to sit in. Down the hall, the back door slid open again, carrying in a quick rush of night air and the smell of charcoal. Footsteps moved across the kitchen tiles. "Dad, you in here?" It was Tasha's voice, soft but unsure. I stood up, straightened the bedspread with one hand, and waited for her shadow to fill the doorway. Derek didn't wake long before proving that last night wasn't a one-off. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when I reached for my bedroom door and found the knob stiff, the mechanism refusing to turn. A shiny new lock sat where the old one had been. My key slid in, but wouldn't budge. He appeared behind me, stretching as if he'd just woken from a peaceful sleep. "Changed it for your safety, Dad. The old lock was loose." Loose. That door had held steady for 20 years. I rubbed the metal between my fingers, feeling the faint warmth from where he'd installed it. Tasha stepped into the hallway with a laundry basket against her hip. She avoided my eyes until she couldn't. "Let's not make this into something big," she murmured. "Everyone's tense." Everyone except the man treating my room like storage he planned to reorganize. I let the comment pass. There wasn't much point in arguing at 7 in the morning, not with the house already leaning in his direction. I moved toward the kitchen, the boards underfoot giving off their familiar creaks. Those were sounds I trusted. The rest of the morning didn't offer me many. While I made coffee, the doorbell rang twice. Mrs. Green from next door shuffled in with a casserole dish wrapped in foil. She always used food when she didn't know what to say. "Heard you had a little scare yesterday, Marcus," she began gently. "You doing all right?" A scare. Interesting choice of word. I hadn't told her anything. Derek must have gotten a head start on shaping the narrative. Before I could respond, she patted my arm as if comforting a child. "You know we're all looking out for you. Getting older is tricky." I thanked her, though the words sat strange on my tongue. After she left, I stepped out to check the mail, needing fresh air more than envelopes. 2 men trimming hedges paused as I passed. "How you holding up, Mr. Ellington?" one called out. "Heard you had a spell." A spell? Now that was new. Word spreads fast when people decide your version of the story doesn't matter. I headed for the church parking lot later that morning, hoping the familiar routine would steady me. Sunday wasn't until tomorrow, but I often came early during the week to help unload supplies or tidy the pantry. It gave my mind somewhere firm to stand. Reverend Cole was locking his truck when I approached. He noticed something in my walk because his brows tightened, though he kept his tone mild. "Morning, Marcus." "Morning, Reverend." He didn't rush me. That's one thing I've always appreciated about him. Some folks jab you with concern, like they're poking a bruise just to see how deep it goes. He wasn't one of them. "I ran into Derek earlier this week," he said as we headed toward the side entrance. "He mentioned you might be needing a little extra support at home." The words snagged. Did he now? Something about you feeling disoriented lately, forgetting things. It took a moment to swallow that. I'm doing just fine, Reverend. He studied me, not judging, just reading the space between my sentences. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Not as your pastor, just as someone who's known you a long time. His offer was genuine, the kind that presses lightly on the shoulder instead of grabbing you by the collar. I nodded and we moved inside to unload donation boxes. While we stacked canned goods, my thoughts drifted back to the new lock on my bedroom door. The shift in Tasha's eyes, Mrs. Green's casserole, the workers' comments, Derek's sudden push to define me to other people before I had a chance to define myself. This wasn't random misunderstanding. It was a slow rearranging of my place in the world, and he was doing it with an efficiency that made my chest tighten. We worked quietly for a while before the Reverend broke the silence. "You've always carried more than you let on," he said. "Sometimes that builds strength. Sometimes it builds pressure." I didn't answer. My hands were busy aligning boxes, but my mind kept circling the same question. When did Derek stop seeing me as his father and start seeing me as a problem to manage? After finishing the pantry, I walked back to my truck. The gravel shifted under my boots, each stone clicking like a small reminder of how quickly footing can change. A breeze passed through the oak trees overhead, scattering a few leaves across the windshield. I opened the door, set my keys on the passenger seat, and leaned back. Conversations, glances, assumptions, all of it brushing against me in a way I hadn't felt before. Not directly hostile, just coordinated. Maybe that's what isolation looks like at first. Not a locked door, but a series of gentle nudges pushing you away from the center of your own life. My phone buzzed. A text from Tasha. "We're out for the afternoon. Dinner's in the fridge." No explanation, no warmth. Just a notice, like you'd leave for a tenant who might forget to pay rent. I started the engine, let it idle for a moment. A few teenagers from the neighborhood waved as they walked past, cheerful as always. They didn't know anything about the morning. They smiled at the version of me they still recognized. I wished I felt like that man. The drive back home stayed quiet. Houses rolled by in calm rows. Kids tossing basketballs in driveways. Someone mowing a lawn. Ordinary scenes. Normal life. But normal feels different when you're watching it from the outside, instead of living in it. Pulling into my driveway, I noticed the trash cans had been moved to the far side of the house. Derek usually left them near the garage after collection day. Maybe he wanted the space. Maybe he didn't think I'd need it anymore. Inside, the house didn't greet me. It waited. That's the best way to describe it. Like the walls had learned a new language overnight. One where silence meant something else entirely. I walked to my room again, testing the lock one more time, even though I already knew what would happen. The key turned a quarter inch and stopped. There wasn't even the dignity of resistance. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. The air conditioner kicked on. Routine noises pretending nothing had shifted. I sat at the table with the note from Tasha still glowing on my phone screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, wanting to write something simple. "Don't do this. Talk to me. Tell me what he said." But I didn't send anything. I turned the phone face down and listened to the house breathe around me, taking up more space than I did. A family picture pinned to the fridge leaned to one side, a magnet shaped like Georgia, barely holding it up. Derek was smiling in that photo, his arm around my shoulders, our faces bright from a day spent fishing on Lake Lanier. That man seemed far away now, not gone, just obscured, like he'd stepped behind a shadow only he could see. The clock in the hallway chimed noon. I stood and opened the fridge, taking out the plate Tasha had left. Mashed potatoes, chicken, green beans. I warmed it quietly, the microwave ticking down seconds with a soft hum. When I sat to eat, a forkful halfway to my mouth, something outside caught my attention. A neighbour pausing on the sidewalk, glancing toward my house longer than usual, before continuing on. Maybe just a passing look, maybe curiosity, maybe they'd already heard more than I had. I finished the meal without tasting much of it. Then I rinsed the plate, set it in the drying rack, and wiped the counter, even though it didn't need it. Movements help when the mind has nowhere safe to stand. By late afternoon, the sun angled through the window, just enough to cast warm streaks across the kitchen floor. I rested my hand on the table, feeling the wood under my palm, steady and unchanged. A soft knock sounded from the front door. Not urgent, not familiar. I went to answer it. The knock at the door turned out to be a delivery man asking for a signature that wasn't mine. Once he left, the house settled back into its strange quiet, and I tried to shake off the heaviness from the morning. I figured running a few errands might help clear my thoughts, so I drove to the credit union where I'd kept my accounts for more than 30 years. As soon as I walked in, Denise, the teller who'd known me since Derek was a boy, gave me a cautious smile. "Marcus, glad you stopped by. Everything okay?" "Should it not be?" I asked. She hesitated before lowering her voice. "Well, you requested to close your secondary account yesterday. I just wanted to confirm it was you before processing anything else." My chest tightened. I didn't request that. Her eyes widened. "Really? The caller knew your social and your security question. Derek handled some of my bills lately, but he'd never had access to my personal accounts. At least, that's what I believed." "Don't close anything, Denise. Not a penny." She nodded quickly. "I'll freeze any changes until you come back with updates." Walking out of the bank, a dull pressure settled behind my ribs. I unlocked my truck and sat there for several minutes, palms on the wheel, trying to make sense of what could have happened. Mistakes occur, sure, but not usually with details that specific. Someone had gone far enough to sound like me. On the drive home, my phone buzzed twice. Messages from Derek. "Dad, don't worry about the mail today, and fix the Wi-Fi when you get home. Password wasn't working." That last line stopped my thumb mid-scroll. The password hadn't been working because he'd changed it 2 nights ago. I hadn't said a word about it, not wanting to start another argument. Apparently, he didn't feel the same restraint. When I walked through the door, he was already in the living room unfolding a stack of insurance papers. "I got everything sorted for you," he said without looking up. "Medical, auto, property. You don't have to deal with any of it anymore." "Why are you handling this without me?" I asked. He exhaled sharply. "Dad, you stress yourself out over details you don't need to keep track of. Let me help." Help. That word carried a bitter aftertaste. "Hand me the mail, Derek. I'll look through it." The folder closed with a thud. "No, I'll manage it. You relax." Relax. Another word laced with quiet dismissal. Then he added, "Also, I updated the Wi-Fi password. I'll give it to you once everything is organized." Everything was organized by him, controlled by him, restricted by him. My mouth went dry, but I kept calm, nodding like his explanation made sense. "All right." He returned to the papers, humming lightly as if he'd tidied up something insignificant. I headed down the hallway, my shoes brushing the carpet in slow, steady steps. The lock on my bedroom door glinted in the corner of my eye, reminding me how quickly things had shifted. Later that evening, when the house quieted, I went into the garage. The space always felt like mine. Tools on one wall, old fishing rods bundled together, cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. Dusty, cluttered, familiar. I pulled down a bin labelled Files, Old, set it on the workbench and opened it. Inside were tax returns from years ago, letters from my wife, warranty receipts, and several unopened envelopes I didn't remember storing. My phone's flashlight cut across the surface as I sifted through the pile. Some documents were missing. Bank forms I'd filed away, investment statements I checked every January. Others were out of order, tucked into the wrong folders. Someone had gone through them. I steadied my breathing, pulled out my phone and began taking photos, one page at a time. It wasn't elegant, but it was enough to freeze everything as it currently stood. The garage door rattled faintly when a gust of wind passed, and for a moment I hovered, listening for footsteps. No one came. I returned to the files, working faster now. Photos of deed copies, photos of insurance binders, photos of letters my wife had written about the land she inherited. Each click of the camera sharpened the feeling crawling up my spine. Something in my home was shifting away from me, inch by inch, and I hadn't realized how far it had gone. When I reached the bottom of the bin, I paused. A torn envelope bearing my wife's handwriting lay folded beneath a stack of blank forms. I touched the paper gently, tracing the loop of the M in my name. But before I opened it, footsteps thudded faintly above me. Someone moving across the living room floor. I slid the envelope back into the folder and closed the bin. Better not draw attention yet. Climbing the garage steps, I felt the weight of the days settle over me. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like a rope pulling tighter. The house didn't feel any warmer once I stepped inside. Derek's voice carried faintly from the kitchen, laughing about something on the phone, completely at ease. I shut the garage door behind me and wiped my palms on my jeans, the faint smell of paper still lingering on my hands. Something important had shifted, and the evidence was no longer hidden. None of it made sense yet, but I could feel the edges of a pattern forming. Whatever this was, it hadn't begun yesterday. I walked toward the hallway, the floor settling under each step as I tried to gather my thoughts. Derek's car sat crooked in the driveway when I pulled in, the front tires angled as if he'd rushed out and forgotten how to park straight. The sight made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't explain why. I stepped inside, expecting the usual afternoon hush, but he was already waiting at the kitchen table with a manila folder spread open in front of him. "Sit down, Dad. We need to take care of this," he said without looking up. Papers rustled as he nudged them toward me. A pen lay beside the stack, positioned like he'd rehearsed the moment. "What is it now?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. A care authorization form. The doctor recommended it. It just means I can help with decisions if something happens. He spoke too quickly, like he wanted the words out before I had time to examine them. I picked up the first sheet. Medical authority transfer, financial access, emergency decision rights. Nothing about a doctor's signature. Nothing about a consultation. Which doctor suggested this? I asked. He exhaled dramatically and leaned back, arms crossing as if he were the one being inconvenienced. Don't do this. You know your memory's been slipping. Everyone's noticed. Everyone. The word cut deeper than he intended, or maybe exactly as deep as he meant it to. My memory is fine, I said. Dad, come on. Stop pretending. You almost forgot to turn the stove off last week. I hadn't forgotten. I'd walked away to answer the phone. He'd turned it into a story that fit whatever he'd been building. I'm not signing anything, I said. The pen clicked loudly in the silence as I set it beside the papers. Derek's jaw tightened. Why do you have to make this so hard? We're trying to help you. Show me the doctor's recommendation. That was all it took for him to shift from frustration to anger. His chair scraped across the floor as he stood. You're doing this again, he snapped, turning everything into a fight. No wonder Mum... He caught himself before finishing. My chest tightened anyway. Derek, don't bring her into this. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you don't sign, you're putting yourself in danger. You could hurt yourself without even realizing it. That's not true. Then you're lying to yourself, and you're dragging the rest of us into it. The kitchen seemed to shrink around us, not through any physical change, but because his presence filled every inch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My hand rested on the edge of the folder, still refusing to move toward the pen. He leaned forward. If you don't cooperate, Dad, you're going to end up doing real harm. And then what? You want the grandkids to watch you fall apart. You want us dealing with the consequences while you deny anything's wrong. His tone sharpened into something that didn't belong in a family. It belonged to someone issuing a warning or a threat. I'm not signing until I understand what this is, I repeated quietly. He slammed a hand on the table. The salt shaker jumped. You're going to make things worse. Why can't you just accept that we know what's best? If you don't work with us, you will hurt yourself. Do you get that? You will be a danger to yourself. The sentence echoed in my head longer than it should have. Not because I believed it, but because I recognized the tactic. I'd seen it before in security work. People trying to build a narrative before an incident, shaping the story ahead of time so their actions later would seem justified. Something cold moved through me. He wasn't trying to help. He was laying groundwork. Derek, I said slowly, why are you in such a hurry to get control of my decisions? For a split second, his eyes flickered, an instinctive reaction he couldn't hide quickly enough. I'd seen that look in suspects before, the fraction of a moment when they realized someone saw the truth behind their posture. This is for your good, he repeated stiffly. No, it's for your convenience. His lips pressed into a thin line. The folder snapped shut beneath his palm. Fine, he muttered. If you want to make everything harder than it needs to be, go ahead. He grabbed the papers and walked out of the kitchen. Not a stomp, not a storm off. Something worse. confident certainty, like he already had another plan waiting. When the house settled again, I stood at the table, tracing the small indent his hand had left in the folder's cardboard surface. The papers might have been gone, but the pressure they carried lingered in my chest. I moved toward the living room slowly, trying to ground myself. Derek's voice drifted from the hallway, low, controlled, speaking to someone on the phone. He's resisting again. No, it won't be long. I know what to do. The call ended. His footsteps went upstairs. I sank into the nearest chair and rubbed the back of my neck. The morning at the bank, the new lock, the closed account attempt, the Wi-Fi password. Now this. Care authorization form. Pieces that once seemed isolated were aligning into a pattern. Something was happening behind the surface of my own home, and Derek wasn't hiding it nearly as well as he thought. A faint thump came from the second floor. Doors opening, closing, drawers gliding shut. I listened instinctively, mapping his movements the way I used to track shifts during patrol duty at the airport. It wasn't fear that kept me still, just awareness. A man senses when something has crossed from tension into danger. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where I kept old receipts and spare keys. My fingers brushed against the one belonging to the safe in the garage. A thought formed quietly, settling in like an answer that had been waiting for the right moment to surface. Before that thought could mature into action, Derek's steps echoed down the stairs again. I closed the drawer softly and turned to face whatever expression he carried this time. Reverend Cole asked me to stop by his office after service, saying he had something he thought I should hear. I followed him down the short hallway behind the sanctuary, the walls lined with old photographs of baptisms and choir groups. He closed the door gently, pulled out a worn binder from his drawer, and set it between us. Marcus, and I've been sorting through some old administrative records. Back when your wife was still with us, she and I talked often. She trusted me with things she didn't share widely. I felt the faintest tug inside my chest, the kind that comes when someone mentions a person you haven't let yourself miss out loud. What sort of things? He opened the binder to a page marked by a bent paperclip. She set up a private investment account, a sizable one. She said it was for the future of Marcus and Derek. She wanted to ensure both of you would always have something secure. I blinked, unsure whether I'd misheard him. She never told me about any account. She planned to, he answered softly. She said she was waiting for the right moment. After she passed, I assumed you knew. But when Derek came to me 2 weeks ago asking about access, the words sank like stones. Derek asked you about it. He said you wanted him to manage it on your behalf, but something in his tone felt off. I decided to confirm with you directly. I leaned back, letting the information settle. My wife had left something I never knew existed. Derek had gone looking for it, pretending I'd sent him. And the Reverend, not even part of our finances, had sensed enough to question it. Do you know where the account is held? I asked. Only the institution, not the balance. But I can get you the original paperwork if you want it. His voice didn't carry judgment, only concern. I nodded slowly, grateful for his steadiness. Walking out of the office, I felt the ground shift again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was clarity starting to form its own shape. When I reached home, several cars lined the street. Tasha's sister, Derek's friend Jerome, even my niece. They were gathered in the living room, voices low until I stepped through the doorway. Every face lifted toward me with the same expression, a blend of awkward sympathy and quiet conclusion. Derek stood near the fireplace, arms folded as if delivering a lecture. "Dad's here," he announced, as though the meeting required a moderator. "We just wanted to talk through some concerns." I didn't sit. "What kind of concerns?" He gestured toward the group. "Everyone's noticed changes. You're not sleeping. You're forgetting things. You nearly burned the kitchen last month." "That never happened," I said. "Maybe not how you remember it," he replied, turning to the others for validation. "Look, this isn't an attack. We're trying to protect him." The room hummed with discomfort. People avoided my eyes, choosing the rug or the framed family picture on the wall. Derek continued, gaining confidence each time someone failed to challenge him. "Dad's money situation is getting messy too. Bills misplaced, strange withdrawals. He's overwhelmed, and that's okay. But we need to step in." I studied each face. Not one person had seen me mishandle anything. They were relying on Derek's version because it was easier than confronting the possibility he might be lying. My niece finally spoke. "Uncle Marcus, we're just worried. That's all." The softness in her voice almost cracked something inside me, because she meant it. Others did not. Derek pressed on. "Admitting you need help isn't weakness. Let us manage things for a while." He offered the suggestion with practiced compassion, but his eyes told another story entirely. They held something cold, something already decided. I inhaled slowly. "Derek, did you tell the Reverend I wanted you to handle Mom's investment account?" His shoulders stiffened. "What investment account?" The lie came too quickly, too clean. Someone who doesn't know a thing usually asks a question differently. Confusion first, then curiosity. Derek's question was flat, rehearsed. I scanned the room again and saw uncertainty flicker in a few faces. Doubt had cracked the surface. "I'm stepping outside," I said calmly. "Continue without me if you'd like." I turned toward the hallway while Derek called after me. "Dad, we're not done here." But I kept moving. Not with triumph, not even with anger. Just a steady decision. My hand brushed the doorframe as I passed, a grounding gesture I didn't intend, but needed. Once on the porch, the evening air met me with a gentleness I hadn't felt inside that house in days. I sat on the top step, listening to the muffled discussions leaking through the walls. They blended together, concern imitating authority, authority imitating care. I stared at the mailbox across the yard, its red flag lowered, and thought of all the years I'd worked to keep this family steady. The weight of responsibility, the instinct to protect, the urge to shield them from anything hard. Now, that instinct had turned into something Derek used against me. The porch boards creaked as I shifted my weight. I didn't know what came next, but I knew what I couldn't do anymore. Stand in a room where my voice was dismissed before I even spoke. Inside, someone said my name again. I stayed where I was, hands clasped loosely, letting their words dissolve into the quiet outside. The house had grown quieter over the past few days, not because tension faded, but because it learned how to settle into new corners. Derek kept himself busy upstairs, moving from room to room with an energy I didn't trust. I slipped into the garage most nights, leaving the door cracked just enough for air to circulate. The space felt untouched by his hands, and that alone made it easier to breathe. I dragged out the old plastic bins, one at a time. My wife had labelled everything with her careful handwriting. Holiday decor, Marcus's tools, important, though she never specified important to whom. I knelt by the last bin on the bottom shelf, brushing off a layer of dust. The lid squeaked as I eased it open. Inside sat folders yellowed at the edges, a few photo albums, and a small wooden box I hadn't seen since she passed. Beneath those items lay a thick envelope sealed with tape, my name written across the front in her looping cursive. Seeing my name like that, gentle, deliberate, sent a tight ache through my chest. I sat on the stool near the workbench before tearing open the seal. Several papers slid into my lap. Investment summaries, land transfer forms, a signed deed. All of it in her name and mine alone. I read each line slowly, letting the meaning sink in. She'd left more than memories. She'd built something steady, something she expected to protect us. Nothing in the documents mentioned Derek, not once. A memory surfaced, her sitting at this same workbench years ago, humming while sorting receipts. I'd asked what she was doing. She said she liked keeping things tidy for the future. I never pressed her. Now I wished I had. I gathered every paper and laid them out across the workbench, organizing them by date. My hands moved with a rhythm I hadn't felt in months. Once everything formed a coherent timeline, I slipped the sheets into plastic sleeves and placed them inside a binder. The binder snapped shut with a kind of certainty I'd been missing. I set my phone on speaker and dialed her old attorney, Mr. Langford. "Marcus," he greeted after the second ring. "Been a long time. What can I do for you?" I found some documents of my wife's. "I need confirmation, and maybe clarification." "Go ahead." I described each paper. The land transfer alone made him clear his throat. "Yes, I handled that," he said. "She was adamant it remained solely for your benefit. She wanted no interference, not from extended family, and certainly not from your son." The bluntness startled me. "She said that?" "More than once. She trusted you to use it wisely should the need ever arise." I thanked him, promising to call again once I reviewed everything. Ending the call left a strange quiet around me, not threatening like before, but piercing. I closed the binder and slipped it under the false bottom of the tool chest. Years ago, I'd built that compartment during a phase when I liked woodworking. Funny how something made for hobby storage now held the most important papers in my life. My phone buzzed against the metal surface. "Unknown number." I answered. Silence. Then a distorted voice. "Stop digging. Don't do this to yourself." The call ended before I could respond. I stared at the phone. A second buzz followed, this time a text. "You're making things hard. Let it go." Another message arrived seconds later. People your age shouldn't stress over things they can't control. No name, no signature. But the tone carried Derek's fingerprints, someone trying too hard to sound anonymous. I deleted nothing. Screenshots joined a separate folder on my phone labeled Notes. I wasn't ready to share them, not yet. but they would matter. A faint thud echoed overhead. Derek moving around again. I remained still until his footsteps faded. The garage smelled faintly of oil and old cardboard. Familiar scents, honest ones. I reached for the wooden box inside the bin and opened it. Inside lay his baby bracelet from the hospital, a photo of the three of us, and the note she once wrote. If you ever doubt yourself, Marcus, remember you built this family from the ground up. Nobody can erase that. The corners of my eyes tightened. I set the note aside and closed the lid gently. A car engine rumbled outside before fading down the street. Probably Jerome dropping by again. That man had been around almost every day lately, supposedly for Derek, though he never lingered long enough to explain why. My phone lit up again with another message. There are easier ways to handle aging. Don't make this ugly. I inhaled deeply, letting the air steady me. This wasn't fear, not anymore. It was recognition. He'd sensed the shift. He knew I wasn't drifting along in the dark anymore. Something in him had grown restless because of it. I wiped my hands on a rag, closed the bin, and pushed it back into place. The garage felt smaller as I stood, but my steps felt heavier with intention. Derek's voice floated faintly from upstairs through the vents. Low, urgent, almost hurried. I reached for the light switch, then paused, listening. Not for danger, for movement. For change. When nothing else stirred, I clicked the switch and stepped toward the door. The faint smell of old paper lingering on my clothes as I walked back into the house. Derek started shouting again before I even reached the bottom of the stairs. His voice thumped through the hallway, sharp, frantic, scattered in a way that made every word feel like a warning. I stepped into the kitchen, still holding the rag I'd used to wipe grease from my hands. He spun around, red-faced, clutching a stack of mail he hadn't bothered to sort. You keep hiding things, he barked, waving the envelopes. You think I don't notice? The accusation made no sense, but logic hadn't mattered in this house for a long time. I placed the rag on the counter, careful not to escalate anything. Derek, I said quietly, let's slow down. What's going on? He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, shoving a bill against my chest as if it proved some invisible crime. Look at this. Why is this in your name? Why didn't you tell us? Why do you keep pretending you can manage things? The edges of the paper dug into my shirt. I eased it away. That's a routine statement, nothing unusual. But reasoning only agitated him further. His breaths grew louder, his jaw clenched. Something inside him shifted, something sharp, impatient, afraid to lose control. He stepped in closer. You don't get it. I've spent years cleaning up after you, years. And every time I'm close to fixing things, you ruin it. The word ruin stung, not because it was cruel, but because he believed it. I turned slightly toward the sink, giving us space. I'm not your burden, Derek. He reacted like I'd swung at him. His hand shot out, grabbing my arm. You are, he snapped. You don't know how to live on your own anymore. You don't know how to manage anything. Everything here, every inch of it, belongs to me eventually. You're just in the way. Before I could pull back, he shoved me. It wasn't a stumble. It was a deliberate force, driven by resentment he no longer tried to hide. My hip struck the edge of the table, a burn shooting down my leg. The room wavered for a moment. I steadied myself against the chair, stunned not by the pain, but by how quickly he'd crossed the line I thought even he feared. His wife rushed in from the hallway, face drawn tight with false alarm. "Derek, what happened?" She didn't wait for his answer before turning toward me, tears already rising. "Marcus, why would you do that? Why would you get physical with him?" My mouth opened, but no sound followed. The lie came too clean, too practiced. She reached for her phone. "I'm calling 911. He's unstable. Please hurry. My father-in-law is being aggressive." "Stop," I said, stepping forward. "That's not..." But Derek cut me off, voice trembling with theatrical fear. "He snapped out of nowhere. I tried to calm him down. I think he's confused again." The room spun, not from the fall, but from the betrayal unfolding less than 5 feet from me. A lifetime of raising him, protecting him, guiding him, twisted into a story he weaponized without hesitation. I stood there, feeling my pulse throb through the bruise forming on my side. He avoided my eyes. She avoided the truth. The call went through. Minutes later, 2 officers stepped into the house. Their expressions stayed neutral, but their posture leaned subtly toward Derek's version of events. My daughter-in-law clutched her chest dramatically. Derek rubbed his wrist like he'd been injured. One of the officers approached me. "Sir, we got a report of a domestic disturbance. Can you tell us what happened?" I exhaled slowly. I didn't put hands on anyone. My son pushed me during an argument. That's the truth. The officer nodded, but didn't write it down. Derek pointed at the table, then at the bruise forming along my arm. He hit the side when he lunged at me. I tried to stop him from hurting himself. Hearing him twist the scene so effortlessly left a strange ringing in my ears. Not shock, recognition. He had crossed into a place where I didn't exist as a father anymore. I was a problem to be solved, a barrier, a piece of furniture needing removal. The paramedics arrived next, motioning me toward the doorway so they could check my vitals. I followed them out to the driveway, grateful for the open air, even as embarrassment prickled my skin. One medic adjusted the strap on the blood pressure cuff. "You feeling lightheaded, sir?" "A little," I admitted. He nodded, glancing toward the house. "Happens in situations like this. Stress does more damage than most people think." His kindness nearly unsteadied me. Behind us, the officers continued questioning Derek. He gestured wildly, pacing in circles, insisting he'd been protecting the family. My daughter-in-law dabbed her eyes like a grieving widow. The medic pressed an ice pack gently against my hip. "You're bruised, but you'll be all right physically. Might hurt for a few days." I thanked him. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. A breeze passed through the neighborhood, carrying the faint hum of someone's lawnmower down the street. The ordinary sounds of life continued, as if nothing inside that house had just broken in half. I leaned slightly against the ambulance bumper. Not to rest, just to feel something solid hold my weight for a moment. The metal felt cool through my shirt. One of the officers returned. "We're not filing charges today, but we recommend giving each other space. Maybe take a walk, sir." A walk. My son had shoved me hard enough to bruise, framed me as unstable, and nearly convinced the police to remove me from my own home. And their suggestion was a walk. I nodded anyway. Anything else would spark another misunderstanding I couldn't afford. As the officers stepped away, Derek glared at me through the open doorway. Not with guilt, but irritation, as if I'd inconvenienced him by surviving the moment. The medic packed his equipment, then paused. "Take care of yourself, all right?" "I will." He climbed into the ambulance and closed the door. The engine rumbled softly. I stayed where I was, palms resting against the metal edge, breathing slow. Something in me shifted, a quiet, steady click, like the final gear locking into place. Not anger, not vengeance. Recognition. If I stayed silent, I'd lose more than control. I'd lose the truth of who I was. The house door creaked again. A shadow moved inside. Derek's voice rose faintly, complaining about the mess this had caused him. I pushed off the ambulance and straightened my shirt. The bruise throbbed, but the pain sharpened my focus instead of dulling it. I turned toward the driveway, taking a few steps as the afternoon light stretched across the pavement. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The call from my wife's attorney came while I sat in my truck outside the grocery store. I had pulled over to catch my breath after the morning's chaos, but his voice steadied me in a way nothing else had in weeks. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Marcus, I've reviewed everything you sent. Your wife's investment portfolio was sealed under your name. Fully. The assets have grown far more than expected. Over 300 million at current valuation. And your son has no legal claim to any of it." I leaned forward until my forehead touched the steering wheel. Not out of shock, out of a strange, heavy relief I couldn't name yet. "Are you certain?" I asked. Without question. She left those accounts protected for you alone. Whatever Derek has been doing, he wasn't authorized to access any of it. The line clicked softly when he hung up, leaving me with the sound of passing cars drifting over the hood. That number, 300 million, barely registered. What mattered was the truth. My wife had trusted me, not Derek, to carry what she built. She had seen something coming long before I did. I started the engine and drove home, feeling each turn of the wheel like a step deeper into something I finally understood. Pulling into the driveway, I spotted unfamiliar sedans parked along the curb. A banner with a real estate company's logo leaned against the mailbox. Through the front window, silhouettes moved across the living room like they owned it. Inside, Derek stood near the mantel, speaking with a polished confidence I didn't recognize. Two realtors hovered around him, nodding along as he gestured toward the ceiling beams. "Original hardwood," he said proudly, as if he'd laid every board. "My father kept the house in good condition, but he's ready to transition. You'll find the neighborhood ideal for upscale buyers." My presence at the doorway went unnoticed until one of the agents glanced over my shoulder. Derek stiffened, but didn't stop talking. Folders, brochures, and house specs were spread across the dining table. Every document about the home pulled out and presented like trophies. Childhood photos of Derek and his sister had been arranged neatly near the pastries on the counter, staged to create a narrative he could sell. He finally addressed me with a strained smile. "You're home early? We're just discussing options, Dad." Dad. The word rolled off his tongue like a prop he needed for the presentation. "Options for what?" "Downsizing," he answered quickly. "You shouldn't be alone in a place this big. We're trying to help." The realtors exchanged polite glances, waiting for me to nod along. Instead, I stepped closer to the table and studied the stack of papers. One document sat on top, a projected sale agreement marked preliminary estimate. Derek had circled the amount in red pen. He'd already planned where the money would go. "When did you decide this?" I asked. "It's been coming for a while," he replied. "You're not managing things well anymore. Someone has to step in." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I scanned the photos he'd placed so carefully near the coffee cake. He'd chosen moments that painted him as the devoted son. Christmas morning, his graduation, him hugging me in front of the old church. Memories bent into marketing tools. His voice continued in the background as he walked the agents toward the hall. "We can close within a few weeks. No complications." No complications, meaning no resistance from me. My eyes drifted to the open binder near the fruit bowl. Derek had assembled a full timeline of transition needs: financial, medical, legal. Every bullet point revolved around removing my autonomy. 2 columns caught my attention: current control and target control. Under current, he listed Marcus, property owner; Marcus, account holder; Marcus, decision authority. Under target, he wrote his name next to every line. A strange clarity washed through me. Not anger, not even betrayal. Just understanding, plain and complete. The account closures, the changed locks, the staged outbursts, the stories he spread about my health, the push that left a bruise. None of it had been impulsive. He'd been moving toward this for years, piece by piece. The man who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair was gone. The one standing in my living room now was reshaping my life like a project to conquer. One of the agents approached me gently. "Mr. Lawson, your son mentioned you'd be relocating soon. Do you have a timeline in mind?" I picked up the binder from the table and flipped through several pages. "He told you that?" "Yes," she replied. "He said you were eager to simplify things." Eager. That word almost made me laugh. Derek rejoined us, eyes narrowing when he saw the binder in my hands. "Dad, let's talk privately." I closed it slowly. "No need. You've been talking plenty." The agents sensed tension and excused themselves to step outside and make a call. Their footsteps faded down the porch. Derek dropped the polite facade. "You weren't supposed to come back yet." "I figured that out." His jaw flexed. "Look, you're not thinking clearly. You don't understand how much responsibility this all is. You should be grateful someone's willing to handle everything for you." Grateful. My thumb brushed the edge of the binder, landing on the red-circled sale number. "You're not handling anything for me, Derek. You're rearranging my life for yourself." He didn't deny it. His silence said more than any admission. In that moment, all the fragments from the past weeks locked into place. The changed passwords, the staged concerns about my health, the false emergencies, the whispering among neighbors, the panic in his voice when he realized I wasn't as confused as he claimed. He never intended to take care of me. He intended to take control of me. The binder rested under my hand, still warm from where he'd been holding it. I left it on the table and walked toward the front door. Not quickly, not dramatically, just steady. Derek stepped aside reluctantly, expecting me to fight or plead or question him. I did none of those. My thoughts were already moving ahead, fitting the final pieces together. The truth wasn't a surprise anymore. It was a map, and I finally knew which way to go. Derek had filled the living room long before I arrived. Chairs were arranged in a tight circle, as if he meant to turn the place into a tribunal. Relatives I hadn't seen in months sat stiffly, clutching cups of sweet tea he'd prepared for them. My sister nodded when I walked in, unsure whether she should smile. No one seemed certain what this meeting was supposed to be, but everyone sensed Derek wanted an audience. He cleared his throat dramatically. "Dad, we're here because we're worried. You're declining. We need to make decisions before things get worse." One aunt murmured something polite, another shifted uncomfortably. Derek mistook their hesitation for approval and carried on. He doesn't manage his finances anymore. He forgets things. He gets confused. And today, we're going to fix it. He slapped a contract on the coffee table so hard the cups rattled. "Dad is signing the house over so we can sell it and move him somewhere safe." I didn't sit. My coat was still on my shoulders. The calm inside me felt unfamiliar but steady, like someone else had stepped forward to take the reins. "You invited the whole family to watch this?" I asked. "They deserve to know what's going on. You need oversight." He gestured at the document. "Go ahead. It's for your own good." No one spoke. The silence pressed down, thick enough to weigh the air. Derek took my quiet for surrender. "He's struggling, folks. We've all seen signs. He's not capable of making complex decisions anymore." He raised his voice, hoping volume would replace proof. "This isn't up for debate. He can't think straight. Someone has to take responsibility." His words were sharp, but not surprising. For weeks he'd been building this story brick by brick, first among neighbours, then in church circles, and now here. The image he painted of me didn't match who I was, but he repeated it with such conviction that I saw doubt flicker even in the eyes of those who loved me. I walked to the table, setting my folder gently beside the contract he'd thrust forward. "Since you're making this public, let's be thorough." Derek frowned. "Dad, don't start." I ignored him and opened the folder. The first sheet bore my wife's signature, elegant, familiar, unmistakably hers. It named me as the sole beneficiary of her investments. "These are the documents your mother sealed before she passed," I said calmly. Her attorney confirmed every page. I turned another sheet, then another. Quiet rippled through the room like a slow-moving tide. My cousin leaned forward, squinting. "Are those property deeds?" "Yes. Every parcel stands under my name alone. And there's more." The attorney stepped inside at that moment, right on time, carrying his briefcase. His entrance stopped Derek mid-breath. A few relatives straightened up as if a judge had walked in. "Afternoon, everyone," the attorney said gently. "Mr. Lawson asked me to verify the documents he's presenting. I handled his late wife's estate, and I'm here to confirm their authenticity." A stunned pause followed. Chairs creaked as people adjusted themselves. Someone coughed under their breath. Derek's face drained of colour. He lunged toward the binder, fingers curled, trying to yank it from the table. "You're lying," he shouted. "He's confused. He doesn't know what he's signing or reading." My sister stepped between him and the documents, hands out. "Derek, enough." His wife grabbed his arm. "Please stop. You're making this worse." "He's manipulating all of you," Derek barked, shaking her off. "He's old. He's slipping. You don't understand." The attorney closed his briefcase gently. "Your father isn't the one who misrepresented the facts today." That single sentence quieted the whole room more effectively than shouting ever could. I gathered the papers slowly, not dramatically, just with the care they deserved. Derek struggled against the hands restraining him, but his anger looked hollow now, frantic rather than powerful. He stared at me with something darker than resentment. Fear. Fear because the truth had cornered him. Fear because he realized the power he'd been grasping at didn't belong to him, and never had. Fear because the story he'd woven so tightly had unraveled in front of the very people he wanted as witnesses. I met his eyes without raising my voice. You didn't lose control today, Derek. You never had it. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. Words failed him for once. I slipped the folder under my arm. The hallway stretched behind me, carrying familiar echoes from years of life inside these walls. Birthdays, Sunday dinners, quiet evenings, loud arguments, bad decisions, hopeful mornings. So many memories built by two hands, mine and my wife's. As I stepped toward the door, one aunt whispered my name, asking if I needed anything. I shook my head gently. No explanations, no speeches, no reassurances. The doorknob felt cool when I turned it. Behind me, relatives murmured in shock. The attorney packed his things, and Derek's voice broke into a strained mix of anger and disbelief. None of it reached me fully. The moment had already passed. Outside, the air carried the faint smell of pine sap and warm pavement. My foot touched the walkway, steady and sure, as the house behind me buzzed with unraveling noise. I kept moving, leaving the door ajar behind me, not as a symbol, not as a gesture, but because my hands were full and I had no reason to close it. The apartment near Piedmont Park wasn't large, but it felt like a place built for breathing. Boxes stacked in quiet corners waited for me to decide where things belonged. I didn't rush. Each evening I chose one item, sometimes two, and placed them where they felt right. My wife's photographs came first. Their frames had gathered dust while buried under Derek's paperwork, but wiping them clean brought a slow, steady calm. I wrote my name in small letters on the back of each frame. Not to claim anything, just to remind myself that her story and mine were still connected in a way no one could rewrite. The days settled into a rhythm. Morning walks along the park paths loosened the tightness in my chest. People passed with dogs, jogging strollers, or coffee cups. No one knew me. No one whispered concerns about my health or questioned my clarity. It was the first time in months I moved through a space without feeling watched. News about Derek arrived gradually. A detective called to clarify details from the night he shoved me. Then another officer followed up about the signatures he'd forged on medical forms. I didn't seek updates, but they came anyway, pulled along by the weight of his choices. My daughter-in-law left him within a week, according to a message from my niece. The real estate agents withdrew their interest after learning he tried presenting the house as his own. His world bent under its own pressure, slowly, predictably, the way a warped beam finally gives. Still, I didn't linger on his troubles. There was nothing satisfying about it, nothing triumphant. Loss and consequence have a way of echoing through a person's life long after the noise stops. And Derek would face that on his own. I carried enough of my own echoes. One afternoon, I opened a box I'd avoided. Inside lay my old watch, a stack of Father's Day cards Derek made as a boy, and a photograph of him sweeping on my chest when he was 4. The sight of it tightened something deep in my ribs, not from grief, but from the strange tenderness of remembering who he used to be. People change. Sometimes the change pushes them toward you. Other times, it pushes them far beyond your reach. I set the picture on a shelf, not to honor him, but to honor the years I tried. A neighbor knocked that same afternoon, introducing herself with a plate of cornbread. She'd heard someone new moved in and wanted to welcome me. We talked for a few minutes about the building handyman and the best grocery store nearby. When she left, her kindness lingered in the room. It reminded me how ordinary life could feel when no one was fighting to control it. Bills came in my name again. My accounts stayed open. I learned the new bus routes, started attending a small discussion group at the library when no one asked about my family. They asked what books I liked, what music I listened to, whether I preferred sweet tea or black coffee. Questions that didn't cut or corner me. Questions that made me part of the room rather than a burden within it. Some nights I sat by the window with the folder of documents beside me, flipping through the pages not for reassurance, but for closure. The numbers meant almost nothing. The security mattered far more. My wife had left me the means to stand upright, even when everything else tilted. One evening, I walked through the park as the sun edged behind the trees. Kids played catch near the fountain. A couple read on a blanket, heads almost touching. The world didn't look the way it had when I was younger, but parts of it still felt familiar. Simple joys, breathing room, the sound of distant laughter. I found a bench and sat long enough to sense that my life, though shaken, had not ended with that house. A week later, I returned home to the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the soft creak of the hallway floor I still hadn't fixed. I shut the door behind me, turning the lock until it clicked. That small motion, the sound of metal sliding into place, reached deeper than any dramatic farewell. It didn't seal me off from the world. It sealed the world I'd escaped from. No audience, no witnesses, no need to explain why I wasn't going back. I set my keys in a bowl by the entryway and walked toward the kitchen to heat some tea. The kettle whistled faintly, steady and familiar. Steam curled upward as I poured the water, and I watched it fade into the air. Nothing inside me felt triumphant, but everything felt right. I carried the mug to the table, sat down, and let the stillness settle. My life hadn't been restored. It had been reclaimed, piece by piece, through choices no one else got to make for me anymore. When the last sip cooled on my tongue, I rinsed the cup, set it on the rack, and glanced once around the apartment. It didn't need to be a mansion or a legacy. It just needed to be mine. Then I switched off the kitchen light and walked toward the bedroom, the sound of my own footsteps enough to fill the space that remained.